Hello everyone. So the purpose of this video is to talk to you a little bit about critical theory, the critical anthology and narrative theory in particular. So I'm going to show you where you can get your critical anthology on Moodle. Now you should have read this already in theory, but this is an important task which is going to allow you to complete written responses. So if you haven't or you need a reminder, the critical anthology is in a section on Moodle all on its own called critical anthology here. Okay, and you've got a PDF of the AQA critical anthology that you can open up. All right. There are also a number of PowerPoints which we've prepared to illustrate different aspects of critical theory. We are only looking at narrative theory for this first piece of coursework. So you can ignore all the other PowerPoints, but one of your jobs is to look through the ideas about narrative PowerPoint here. So you need to read section 1 of the critical anthology itself. The PowerPoint will give you a little bit more detail and obviously this talk itself, and the next one is going to help you as well. So between these different resources, you should have a pretty good grasp of the critical theory that we need. Okay, so I've opened up the PDF of the critical anthology that you can download from Moodle. And if we look in here, you can see it's got a table of contents. We need section 1, ideas about narrative. And the other sections you can ignore for now, but we will be looking at one or two of those sections next year, specifically Marxism and feminism. I want to talk a little bit about narrative in this video and what that means. Critical theory is a way of focusing on different aspects of texts. So Marxist theory would focus on political aspects of texts. Feminist ways of reading would focus on gender in texts and the portrayal and the writing of men and of women. Now, narrative is a nice and general topic because it's all about stories. And you can see that from some of our headings in these sections here. Story types, structure, beginnings, endings, and so on. It's an interesting question, I think, to consider. Why do we need this extra word narrative? What's the difference between narrative and story? And I think there is a significant difference, apart from just narrative being a posher word for story. To some extent, narrative is just a posh word for story, and you can often use those two words interchangeably. But this is a way that I see it that makes narrative a useful word to know and to use. A story is what happens. If you consider the story of Room, you could tell that story in many different ways. You could summarize it if you told the story to a friend. You could write down a shortened version of it, an abbreviated version of it. You could even start to retell that story from different characters' point of view. So the story of Room told from old Nick's point of view would be significantly different to the story told from Jack's point of view, which is what we've got. In a sense, they're all the same story. It's the same events and it's the same sequence of events. But narrative, crucially, is about how we present that story. And there are various things that we can choose as we construct our narrative. We can choose how much detail to go into, whether to describe things in broad terms or in close-up detail. We can decide whose points of view to use. And significantly, we can choose between a first-person narrator, a character within the story, or a third-person narrator, who would be an omniscient figure outside of the story. We can choose to control time in interesting ways. So where do we begin to talk about? Are we going to use flashbacks? Are we going to use flash forwards? So this kind of sequence of events, which is the story, this sequence of events, can be presented in many different ways. To summarize this, the story is the what happens, and the narrative is the how. How is that presented? And for your coursework, you're going to have to focus on that how. So we're not, for instance, going to be super interested in the themes of this book, actually. We will have to understand them basically. But our focus will be on the nuts and bolts of Emma Donohoe's narrative technique. And to understand this is going to give you some really useful understanding of the way that stories work that's going to be useful all the way through this course. So I think these skills are really sort of long-term useful, not just for your coursework. I've chosen some of these narrative bits of writing to focus on rather than others. What we've actually got in the section is extracts from books. So we've got Seabrooker writes 7 basic plots. We have a short extract from that. We have an extract from The Art of Fiction by David Lodge. And David Lodge crops up a few times, excuse me, in this text. So there are several extracts from David Lodge's work in your anthology. You're going to make at least one quotation from the critical anthology in your essay. You might make more than one. But the exam board have provided this as a starting point, really, for your ideas about narrative fiction. So you need to show that you've thought about what they've given you and selected something to use. So there are 10 extracts in total. I'd like you to read them all, but I'm only going to be talking about a selection of them, and you're going to be writing about those as one of your tasks. So that's going to be coming up in our next video. Okay, so that's all for now. So if you've read that section of the critical anthology, if you've read these 10 extracts, you're now ready to watch the next video.